You're watching CTMUist. This is a video response to Professor Dave Explains, who recently published his attempt to debunk Christopher Langan's presentation of the CTMU.
And I realized, well, I've got to put together a theory, construct a theory, in which reality is actually logico-geometric. And so that's where the CTMU came from.
And the CTMU is the cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
Cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
This is your theory of everything.
My theory of everything, and it's all in the name.
And there's the big reveal. Einstein plus Russell equals Langan, who is clearly smarter than both of them put together. So let's dig into this theory, shall we?
If you take a good close look at that, you've got cognitive theory, and of course, you know, a theory is a kind of language, theoretic language, okay? And then you've got cognitive theoretic model, you've got a model, and then you've got universe. You've got a language, you've got a universe, and then the model is the mapping between them. CTMU says those are all the same thing. All of those terms, all of those properties are distributed everywhere over reality. Reality can have only one structure once you realize that and you implement it in theoretical form.
Yeah, it's going to be this brand of word salad for the rest of the interview, folks. No, Chris, theories are not languages.
Let's fact-check that claim, Professor. The Encyclopedia of Mathematics says that an object language is a language that is an object of study. In the formalization of a meaningful theory, one distinguishes between two languages. One is the language of the formalized theory. So theories actually are a kind of language. They're object languages. But wait, there's more. In logic, a theory is often based on a formal system. A formal system is actually the same as a theory, which is made up of a deductive apparatus and a formal language. Of course, the deductive apparatus is also linguistic because it can be regarded as a syntax. I presented these issues to Professor Dave, who, according to his channel description, has a knack for explaining stuff and a desire to share some knowledge. I asked him to please explain why theories aren't languages. According to the Encyclopedia of Mathematics, a formal theory is an object language. But after 2 weeks, Professor Dave still hadn't shared any knowledge with me. All I got was a reply from a troll. In the meantime, he focused on sharing his insults, his knowledge, with other users.
No, Chris, theories are not languages. They are models.
This claim of the professor's comes completely from out the wilderness. There's no indication whatsoever that theories are models, and he doesn't elaborate on his reasons for claiming this either. The fact that theories are not models can be easily researched. Model theory is the study of the relationship between formal theories and their models. They are not the same. And look at how formal theories are described. A collection of sentences in a formal language. There's the connection between theories and languages again. Some academic resources make the difference between theories and models more clear. While a theory tries to explain a phenomenon, a model tries to represent a phenomenon. One relates to the other, but they are not the same. Typically, we talk about models of a theory, because a theory needs a model in order to be interpreted. But it's not just what they attempt to do that makes them different, it's what they consist of as well. I pointed out to the professor that a theory is a formal system with axioms for deriving the statements or explanations, and unlike the model, it doesn't contain definitions. Whereas the model is for interpretation and attributing meaning to the statements. I also included an example of how those differences manifest in people's disagreements. Two people who believe in the same theory can come to different conclusions about the implications of the theory if they have different models, due to, for example, disagreeing on the proper definitions. The professor then responded like this. He said, "I'm describing them as the same thing." Bewildered, I then had to reply by making my previous point clearer. And you can read that if you want to, but all I'm doing is repeating myself.
Saying theories are languages and then listing models separately as though theories aren't models only demonstrates that you don't know what any of those words mean.
It just gets more ironic that, earlier in the video, the professor tried to make it look like Chris Langan doesn't know what a theory is by pretending to be Chris, misspelling the word theory. But what was the professor's reason for saying this?
But very quickly before doing that, we can already say a lot just from reading the description.
Can we? The professor is saying we can learn a lot about a theory someone has proposed from a video description. I'm going to disagree with that. Normally, if you want to judge a theory that someone has formalized, you should do this by reading their publications on the theory. Maybe this explains why the professor didn't have a firm grasp of what a theory is, if he's been judging theories by reading video descriptions.
It says that Chris is joining the show to discuss his theory of everything: God, psychedelic drugs, and aliens. His theory of everything is him musing on random topics like a college freshman who got high at a party for the first time. This demonstrates that the smartest man in the world does not know what a theory of everything is.
The video description mentioning one thing after another doesn't mean that the first item contains the other items mentioned, and only those items. It means those are the topics the viewer can expect to be discussed. If I say that I'm here to discuss my job, God, collecting stamps, and the weather, does that mean my job is about God, collecting stamps, and the weather? No, they're just words in the same sentence that refer to what I'm here to discuss. We're going to unfortunately find out that a lot of Professor Dave's comments are exactly like this one in their pettiness, and in their effort to misread Chris as a form of rebuttal.
Let's define these two terms right now so that it will be very clear to you during the video that he has no idea what he's talking about. First up, a theory. A theory is a scientific construct that correlates large amounts of data and explains them simply and coherently. Theories must be testable, they must be falsifiable, and are typically based on quantitative data.
Correlations don't come from theories. Mathematical models are what give you correlation, but that's not the same as a theory.
A theory of everything also has a very specific meaning. It does not mean, whoa, think about it, bro, this totally explains everything in the universe, bro. It is a term that stems from theoretical physics and the attempt to find a quantum field theory that applies to all the fundamental forces.
I'd have to disagree again there, Professor. A theory of everything obviously does have to explain everything in the universe, in addition to the four fundamental forces.
This is the current forefront of the standard model of particle physics, and many of its predictions have been vindicated, though there is still more work to be done. The last step after that would be to unify such a model with the last remaining force, gravity, which is currently described by Einstein's general relativity. A quantum field theory that unifies all four forces, should it be possible, would be a theory of everything, as it would be a single theory, and by theory we are talking about a rigorous mathematical model that describes all four fundamental forces. That's what theory of everything means, and that's the only thing it means.
That's what the CTMU claims to be. If you want to suggest the CTMU isn't a theory of everything, then you have to actually address the part of it that's relevant. The CTMU construct for uniting the four fundamental forces consistently with quantum mechanics is called conspansion. It includes explanations for gravity, cosmic expansion, quantum phenomena, and even spirituality. But as we just heard, Professor Dave wants to insist that spirituality can't be included in a theory of everything. He claims it can only mean physics. So the professor either thinks that spiritual things are included within physics, or he means to exclude it from what's being theorized by a theory of everything. Ironically, you need a model in order to do this, because the disagreement here is about definitions, which don't exist in theories. They're in the model you're using. So yet again, the distinction between model and theory has become important. A distinction that Professor Dave doesn't believe exists. If he had understood the difference, he would have been able to argue his claim that a theory of everything can only mean a theory that unifies the forces of physics with actual support. But the problem with defining a theory of everything to only be about physical phenomena is that a theory of everything defined in such a way has a big problem with Gödel incompleteness, because physics is not self-referential nor metalinguistic, which entails that if the theory is inconsistent, the consequence is incompleteness, which undermines calling it a theory of everything. So Professor Dave's reason for stating that Langan doesn't know what a theory is was only based on him thinking a video description is a reliable indicator of whether someone knows what a theory is, followed by mistaking theories for models, and then insisting a theory that explains everything can't be the same as a theory that unifies the forces of physics, The first of these mistakes was just silly, which I brought up to him in the comments section of his video, and the second two were a consequence of him failing to distinguish between models and theories. It's astonishing that someone who promotes himself as a professor and an explainer of scientific concepts couldn't do the very basic amount of research required to learn what theories and models are before going on to publicly state that theories are models. He's really not in any position to be mocking Chris Langan's understanding of theories by attributing false quotes with the word theory misspelled in them to Chris. Chris understood that theories are a kind of language, and the professor didn't. This is probably the right time to mention that Professor Dave Explains isn't a real professor, just a self-appointed YouTube professor. Some of you might have noticed that Chris stated that you've got language, universe, and model. CTMU says those are all the same thing. And thought to yourself, how can that be true if theories aren't models? Chris can be forgiven for not giving the exact relationship between the theory of the CTMU and the model of the CTMU in this interview, because interviews with the media don't get into mathematical details. If you read Chris Langan's paper on language, you'll see that he explains that because formal systems, or theories, don't contain their own universes, they're not guaranteed to be modelled on the universe, or to be interpretable within the universe. This isn't the case in the CTMU. In the CTMU, theory and universe are tied together in their entirety by an identity language in the model. This allows the universe to be recognized by its own theory, through its own model. This is the relationship that appears when theory and universe are scaled out to their maximum extent, which is why the CTMU is a theory of everything, in which the universe is its own theory and its own model. This doesn't conflict with the definitions of model and theory I've explained. Theories, plural, are still different from models in the plural. It's not that model, language, and universe are the same thing. Rather, reality has each of those properties. Reality is its own representation, or model, its own set of instructions, or language, and its own universe. So when Chris said they're the same, he didn't mean their definitions are the same, only that at the maximum scope, they become the CTMU, where each contains the other.
No, Chris, theories are not languages, they are models. Saying theories are languages and then listing models separately as though theories aren't models only demonstrates that you don't know what any of those words mean. Then saying that all of those plus the universe are the same thing definitely proves you don't know what those words mean, since if they were the same thing, those different words wouldn't exist.
So why do the words model and theory exist then? You just claimed that they mean the same thing only seconds earlier. But they're different words, and the professor says they mean the same thing. He can't even keep his critique internally consistent. I even asked him this and he didn't respond. I was hoping the professor would explain.
What properties are distributed everywhere?
The ones he just said, look. Language, universe, and model.
Properties of language? What properties of what language?
No. Properties of language. Chris Langan referred to language in general, which has properties like syntax and semantics. What we're getting from the professor right now is the same strategy of misreading things as a debunking tactic.
And how are they distributed in deep space where nobody is using language? None of this means anything.
So the professor is assuming it's not the case in order to argue against it. That's a classic question-begging fallacy. And there doesn't need to be any people in deep space using language for the structure of deep space to be language. That ought to be obvious.
Over here, math over here, physics over here, but you're presenting something that is universal.
Correct.
Not really presenting so much as vaguely referencing and never actually describing. Physics has math in it. Want to show us some math, big guy?
Because this is exactly where academics normally show us the math in their work. In an interview with the media. And anyway, if you're someone who claims theories are models without looking it up, what would the point be in showing you math? You've already shown us that math doesn't matter to you.
Putting Einstein and Russell together, what does that mean? What about Bertrand Russell, and how do you shove that into physics equations? Want to get a little more concrete?
He does, in his papers. That's where you have to look. Most people aren't expecting math to be presented to them in interviews with the media, because they know that that doesn't normally happen. It seems that self-appointed YouTube professors don't know that, though.
That's exactly right. And that's what the CTMU says. It just comes up with the mathematical structure that you need to build a reality out of that.
Which mathematical structure, Chris? You keep pretending that you can do math, but you haven't shown anyone an ounce of math. Come on, buddy, one little equation.
This is just one of those cases where someone insists that something doesn't exist, when in actual fact they simply never looked for it. All these sarcastic questions he's asking are completely toothless because they're just a result of his own willful ignorance. He hasn't looked any of it up. See? He's a professor who doesn't look things up. If he truly wanted to see the math, he would have looked it up, but he hasn't. And that just proves his sarcastic questions requesting to see the math are a complete lie, because we can now see that he had no desire to see any of the math Chris Langan has published.
So you come up with that identity and then you search it for its properties. You see, once you've built the preliminary framework, then you start deducing the properties of this identity, and you find out that those properties match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions.
What preliminary framework? Describe it. Which properties? List them. Actually say something. And sorry, God as described in the world's major religions? There's a bunch of different ones, and they're very not the same.
Very not the same. Maybe this professor should fix his appalling English before accusing anyone else of generating word salad. As for calling them not the same, does that mean you're presuming that they have nothing in common? Because Langan's point was that they do have something in common. There's a description they have in common, so if you respond they're not the same, then it's reasonable to think that they have nothing in common, since nothing else you could say would actually contradict what Langan is saying. What the professor is unaware of is that two things don't have to be the same in order for some part of them to be the same. Langan's claim that most of the world's religions describe God's properties in the same way doesn't imply that those religions are the same. They could describe God in terms of a shared set of properties, yet differ in other respects. To understand this, let's use a simpler example. This is a cat, and this is a dog. They are not the same animal. However, despite not being the same, they both have things in common. Both of them have 2 ears. Both have a tail. And both have 4 legs. Having these features in common doesn't mean they are the same, contrary to the inference Professor Dave presented. Remarkably, the same relationship applies to religions. Despite many of them describing God to be the creator of the universe, that doesn't entail that they can't be different religions. So there you have it. Just because 2 religions aren't the same, that doesn't imply that they don't have anything in common. With Professor Dave Explains, we're learning something new every day.
Are you talking about Vishnu? Something tells me you're not talking about Vishnu. What about Allah? No, not him either.
What did Chris just say? This is shameless strawmanning. He just said that the properties he's talking about match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions. Simply telling Chris he's not talking about Hinduism or Islam doesn't work. It's a strawman fallacy. If you have a reason why he's not talking about those, you have to present a reason, not just something tells me.
You need a certain kind of quantum. That quantum is called an identity operator. God is the identity. So obviously these little quanta, they have to be, they're doing things, they're processing, so we can call them operators, right?
No, we can't. An operator is a function.
Wait, why not? Why is it that we can't call quanta that are processing states an operator? Just because operators can be considered functions. The professor's slide shows that a function acts on a quantity. Why can't quanta that are processing states do that? I have a feeling that Professor Dave's reason is going to end up being that they're different words, again.
An operator is a function. It's a mathematical structure. It's not a physical entity like whatever quantum he's making up.
Wait, if they're not physical, then why does it say on your slide, using operators with the wave function? And why does it say a function acts on a quantity? Aren't either of those physical?
Photons, electrons, these are quanta. Functions are not quanta.
Yeah, why aren't photons and electrons operators? The slide now says a quantum refers to a discrete unit of energy. So does a discrete unit of energy not have any functionality of an operator? It doesn't act on a quantity, for example?
What I'm saying is that's consciousness. And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
Okay, so pay attention to the fact that in Professor Dave's video, Christopher just said, because those are the quanta. Then the professor only includes this part, where Chris is asking Michael if he heard him explain what he said. And then the next part of the interview that Professor Dave shows is the part where Chris is explaining what the problem is with the real manifold of classical physics.
Unrelated to what he said previously.
So the real manifold of classical physics is a paradoxical construct. Okay? So that's why those two things, that's why that doesn't work with quantum field theory and the idea that things are quantum fluctuations and fields. That's why, as a matter of fact, that particular concept of the real manifold, that doesn't work for anything at all.
He's just listing random physics terminology. Quantum fluctuations or quantum fields, Chris. If you knew what those things were, you wouldn't list them in a sentence that way as though they were the same thing.
So Professor Dave is accusing Chris of speaking about quantum fluctuations and quantum fields as if they're the same thing, because Chris said the idea that things are quantum fluctuations and fields. In the original interview, the part where Chris says, because those are the quanta, is 4 minutes before the part where he says, quantum fluctuations and fields.
Saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
Paradoxical construct. Okay? So that's why those two things, that's why that doesn't work with quantum field theory and the idea that things are quantum fluctuations and fields. That's why.
In Professor Dave's video, this has been cut down to 90 seconds.
And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
Oh, these quanta you made up now are consciousness? Unrelated to what he said previously.
So that's why those two things, that's why that doesn't work with quantum field theory and the idea that things are quantum fluctuations and fields.
But in between 27 minutes and 31 minutes of the original video, Christopher explains the relationship between quantum fluctuations, quantum fields, and this problematic manifold. So now let's see what Professor Dave removed.
It's in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me why are they not reconcilable?
Right now, modern physics know basically what you've got is you've got a bunch of quantum fields in superposition, and then those fields consist of little fluctuations, little quantum fluctuations, right? Where is the fixed array? We were talking about a manifold, right, with a bunch of zero-dimensional points.
Yep.
Okay? Those two things are not compatible. Okay? Quantum field theory and that fixed array manifold where you can parameterize all of the causal functions using the manifold, that doesn't work. Okay, those two things don't fit together.
Okay, so he said those fields consist of quantum fluctuations. The fluctuations are a part of the field. That's what the resources on physics also say. Why did Professor Dave delete this? Could it be a misrepresentation tactic to try and make it seem like Chris was suggesting they're the same thing? I asked Professor Dave, but he didn't respond, despite continuing to mock and deride people who commented after I did. There's that knack for explaining things again. It seems he's learned to ignore me after I exposed his blunder on the issue of models and theories. As for he's just listing random physics terminology, it might appear less like listing random terminology to you if you hadn't sliced out the part where Chris explained the relationships between these things. And Chris's explanation of why a fixed manifold with zero-dimensional points can't exist made perfect sense to me. Whenever Professor Dave fails to come up with a reason why Chris is wrong, he just alleges that it's word salad or a random list of words. The only hope he has that this kind of willful ignorance technique will work on the people listening is that they didn't understand either, because anybody who did understand it can just see straight through it.
You displease God, that's exactly what's going to happen to you. God is going to cut you off, and he's going to say, I can't see him anymore. He's going to turn away from you, and then you won't be able to reunite. Salvation will be impossible for you, because salvation means that God has got to pull you back into himself.
Right.
Okay, but God doesn't want to see you anymore. He doesn't even know you exist. He knows your physical body is there, but he's not interested anymore because you hate him, you deny his existence, you offend him, so he's not going to look at you, right?
I will never stop being amused by how petty and infantile the Christian God is to people like this. Like, whatever, I made you, gave you no evidence whatsoever that I exist, and you won't even love me and worship me? Do you know how much that hurts my feelings? I know I'm infinite and perfect, but I can still have my feelings hurt, you know. I'm sorry, but anyone who believes in this paltry kind of God is an intellectual toddler.
So Professor Dave can't resist but misrepresent yet again. Chris Langan didn't mention love or worship at all in his explanation, so for Professor Dave to reply in a way that asserts that's what's being denied from God's perspective is just strawmanning. Chris's characterization of God doesn't seem petty or infantile to me. It's quite reasonable to turn away from someone and to pay them no attention if they deny you exist. And similarly, if someone hates you, it's normal to stop looking at them and to cut them off, far from being petty or infantile.
You're saying that he sort of that the devil sort of lacks substance, or that's why he needs the humans?
I'm saying the devil lacks coherence. Coherence is what brings everything into superposition, right, with itself. In other words, it allows something to, this is going to sound a little bit paradoxical, allows something to communicate non-locally with itself,
Okay.
right? All of its possible states are in superposition. They exist all at once, okay? And this is pretty much inescapable.
The word salad shooter malfunctions every once in a while, and Chris made it 45 minutes before his first mishap. Not bad. It's tough to keep the stream of bullshit going. Luckily, he had the cigar in his hand, so he could pretend to be doing something while deciding to stop talking. At any rate, what he said was meaningless. He was talking about superposition while gesturing inwards in a way that would indicate the opposite of superposition.
No, he was talking about coherence while gesturing inwards.
Coherence is what brings everything into
So here, Dave's misreading tactic finally goes into overdrive. When you can't misread someone's words, just misread their hand gestures and assume their intended meaning from there. Notice how Professor Dave tells us that what Chris said was meaningless, but then switches to addressing Chris's hand gestures.
At any rate, what he said was meaningless. He was talking about superposition while gesturing inwards.
Coherence is what brings everything into
When you run out of ways to strawman someone, but you're desperate to find a way, you can just copy Professor Dave and resort to strawmanning their hand gestures.
Superposition is diffuse, a system existing in many states at once. When the wave function collapses, the system will exhibit a particular state, like what his hands are indicating by crushing inwards, to what would be fewer states or a singular state.
First of all, Chris Langan didn't say quantum superposition in this context. All he said was superposition, and I don't see the word diffuse in the definition of superposition. If you're going to be as pernickety about words and hand gestures as you have been, you should live up to that standard yourself. The definition of superposition, I found, agrees perfectly well with Langan's choice of hand gesture. The action of placing one thing on or above another, like Christopher is doing with his fingers.
All of its possible states are in superposition. They exist all at once.
Secondly, the rest of what you said, in many states at once, agrees with the hand gesture he's making. Many states, symbolized by his fingers, and at once, symbolized by him gesturing together.
All of its possible states are in superposition.
And Chris made it 45 minutes before his first mishap. Not bad.
Yeah, you might not have understood, but there's no mishap there. You're accusing him of stalling for words, but that's not a mishap in what he said. And lastly, I think you just misunderstood him by thinking he was speaking specifically about quantum superposition, rather than superposition in mathematical structures generally. He said the devil lacks coherence. He wasn't saying the devil is quantum. So again, the professor's core tactic of twisting someone's words and trying to construct a straw man with them has failed again. The professor said many things I have not addressed, most of which were attacks on Chris Langan's personality and political views, which is not what the CTMUist channel is about. If by any chance Professor Dave sees this video, then I extend an invitation to Dave to a one-on-one live debate